This is Shabbos Lamed Daled. We were talking about dragging heavy objects, and the question was if they're allowed to be dragged, and if they're not allowed to be dragged, why not, and according to who. So we end off with a brisa that nan. We learned in a brisa, lo yoger adam mesamita. A person may not drag a bed via sakise, or a seat via safasafso, or a bench via sakyarda, or a easy chair mifnei shehu oiser charetz, because it's going to create a furrow in the ground. Rabbi Shimon says it is mutter. Rabbi b'shem Rab Chuna. Rabbi says in the name Rab Chuna. Rab Chagai b'shem Rab Ze'era. Rab Yosi b'shem Rab Ila. Moedin chamim Rabbi Shimon. In this aspect, Rabbanon agree to Rabbi Shimon. How? Because we've learned this in the Gemara earlier. Bekise sharaglav mishurah betit, when you have a chair and the legs are already sunk into the ground, so then you're allowed to drag it already because it already is in the ground. It already started the furrow. Therefore, you dragging, continuing it is not creating a furrow in itself, and the Rabbanan say it is mutter. Kama the tema mutter l'taltaloi. Just as you say it's mutter to move the chair, then also the Kama say mutter l'hachzura. You also could return the chair. You could also put a chair back, and even if you sit down in it and it sinks into the ground, that's also mutter according to the Rabbanim. Rabbi Yisrael basically says afana nami taninam. We've also learned even going further on nidlim b'Shabbos. You may take it on Shabbos. You can take it out of the ground on Shabbos. Just pull it out of the ground that the legs are sunk into. You do that on Shabbos. I'm Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Bunim. The Rabbi Shimon, this is all according to Rabbi Shimon. I'm Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Bun. Maisna, Amar Kain. That he said the Mishnah says so like this, because kol hakelim einon nig ronin. No utensil may be dragged on a dirt floor on Shabbos. Chutz min hagala, except for a wagon. Why? B'fnei shehi kai veshes, because the wheels already are pressed into the ground. Since the weight of the wagon presses the wheels into the ground, and now when you drag the wagon, it's the wheels that are going through the ground, continuing those furrows, that is allowed, just like having the legs of a chair, pulling it, that's allowed. Rab Chuna b'shem Rabbi, le'inyan Shabbos is amras, so the distinction regarding something in the laws of Shabbos. Regarding Muksa and the laws of Shabbos, Chizka b'shem Rav Yanai. What is that? They had an academy of Rav Yanai. The Inyan Chazaka Itmeres. Whether it was stated regarding Chazaka, could you do this, and that will help you create Chazaka. Anyone who uses an object without objection from the owner, after a while it becomes a Chazaka, and the new person who's been using the object without objection is assumed to be the owner. Rabbi Yosi Misham Rabbi Yanai, that le'inyan tuma it's meris. Really, he was talking about the inyan tuma. So the Gemara goes on. Rab Acha bar Chanina Rab Yasa b'shem Rab Yechanan, that menorah kitana mutal tatla. You could move a small menorah. Why could you move a small menorah? Clearly, a small menorah is not going to drag the ground. So the reason why you can move the menorah is not because it doesn't make a furrow. So there must be a different distinction between moving heavy objects and a small menorah. What's this distinction? V'loi klihu, but isn't it a kli? And any kli could then be muksa. V'loi kol ma shebabayis min hamenoirahu. For any utensil that is in the house is considered prepared automatically for muksa. So Amr Rabbi Yosi Brabon, he says tiftar. So interpret that like this: Shalakacha imar l'schaira, where he took it for himself for business. Ay Shabbos erev Shabbos im chashecha, or if it came to him on erev Shabbos right before it got dark. V'la shamata minem klum, and we haven't talked about this at all. So in these situations where a person takes it for himself and now designated for business, he's going to sell it, or it got to him right before Shabbos, so he didn't have a chance to designate it or to light it. So in those situations, small menorahs may be used and may be moved on Shabbos. Obviously not used to light, but they could be moved on Shabbos, not muksa. Zokt halacha ches. Noisnin kli tachas aner lekabel nitzoitzos. One may place a vessel under a lamp to catch the sparks. So this is being done on Shabbos. He would not put a bowl of water or a kli with water under it, because that will extinguish the sparks as they come down. Zok the Gemara. Hacha atamar, you will say, Noisnin, Kli Tachas and Ner Lekabel Nitzoitzais. One may place a vessel under a lamp to catch the falling sparks. But you may not put water because it might extinguish the sparks. The Hacha atam, we already said, a nice and Kli Tachas and Ner. We would not put a Kli underneath a Ner to catch the dripping oil. We learned that in the Gemara before. So the difference is, there you're trying to catch a shemen, which is muksa, and you're trying to now collect muksa, so you can't do what a bus is to collect muksa. And the kan ein here, you don't need the sparks, and therefore you're not trying to collect muksa. I would say another distinction, obviously, is that the sparks go out. So at the end of the day, your kli is still empty. You still have an empty kli. You protected your wooden table, but you still have an empty kli. Whereas if you're collecting oil, you collected muksa, and now you had a bus to muksa. At the end of the day, when it's collecting sparks, you look in there, there's no sparks, it's empty, and therefore you didn't really collect anything. It's not a bus to anything. One may not place water so that it extinguishes it. Rabbi Shmuel, B'Shem, Rabbi Zera, the Rabbi Yosi. This is according to Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi says, Haveinan Savrinan Meimar. We thought to say originally the Maplagi, Rabbi Yosi, Rabbanon. What's the argument in Rabbi Yosi and the Rabbanon? Bisha Mechitza Shel Kalim. When a person puts up a wall of kalim, he's trying to put up a wall of vessels and therefore to stop a fire. So he puts a whole bunch of vessels up to stop the fire, hoping that will stop the fire. Whereas aval im also mechitza shamayim, but what happens if he puts up a mechitza of water, whether it's going to be a brick of ice, some snow, or now he fills up all those vessels with water. So then maybe they don't argue. Maybe the Rabbanan agree that it's forbidden. Because even though it's indirect, but the bottom line is you're doing something where it's going to either crack the vessels or melt the snow and extinguish the fire right away. Whereas just putting up the vessels and blocking the fire, containing it is not such a big deal. So min mad amar Rav Shmuel b'shem Rav Zeira. So from that which Rav Shmuel said in the name of Rav Zeira, so the Rabbi Yosi that he said Rabbi Yosi. So how do we're going to say afilu also mechitza al mayim hi machlokes, even if one set up a wall of water. So then now it is a subject of dispute between them, and the Rabbanan necessarily would not agree with Rabbi Yosi and say that it's usher. Rabbi Yosi would say that it's usher, but Rabbanan would say still incidental. That's not what your machshava is. You're not doing something with machshavas. Your intention is not to extinguish fire. It's just to put water there, and eventually if the fire melts it or breaks the kalim and gets water, that's his own problem. But Rabbi Yosi would disagree and say that it would be prohibited. Hadjalach Kira. We will turn to you, Kira. Now we are starting Perek Dalid. This is the first halacha on Perek Dalid. We're going to talk about insulating a pot. So it's coming Shabbos, and you have a hot pot that was taken off of the fire, and now it's sitting there cooling off. So what you want to do is you want to insulate it so that you'll be able to eat the food Friday night or Shabbos day. The question is, what could you insulate a pot with, and what you are not allowed to insulate a pot with, and why? What could you insulate and what could you not insulate? Ein toimnin, do not insulate. Loy begefes, which is mark, which is dried out produce, which is made into charcoal. So this is long-lasting charcoal. V'loy bezevel, and not with manure. V'loy b'melech, not with salt. V'loy b'seder, not with lime. V'loy b'choil, not with sand. Bein lachen, bein yeshvin, whether they're moist or whether they are warm. Loi beteven, v'loi b'moichin, v'loi b'geizin, v'loi be'asavim, b'zman sheish lachem. You can't do it with straw or with flocking. Flocking is another material that grows in the ground, like cotton or flax. And you can't do it with grape skin. You can't do it with grass if they are moist. Avol time in behen yivation. But if they are all dry, then you could do it. Time them bechsos uveiros. You could do it with clothing and with produce. Ubafnei yoino b'nera shel pishtan ubis unsoires shel choroshen daka. And you can do it with dove feathers, you can do it with flax combings, or with fine carpenter's sawdust. So sawdust from a carpenter, that's fine. Rabbi Yehuda Iser b'daka, he says when it's fine, you cannot do it. Umatir begasa, but he says if it's coarse, then you could insulate with that material. Zok the Gemara with an explanation about this. Time then. What could you insulate? What could you not insulate with? Lefisha dvarim halalu roichsen umar tzichin, because these substances are hot and they heat up. So what's going to happen? What are we worried about? For who noitlin, he will remove the food on Shabbos. The hein tachas loich yadai, and in order for it to cool off, so we could take it, and then umachzirin, and he will turn it to the insulation of these items, and they will add heat. Lefikach asru litmain bahem. Therefore, the Rabbanan said it's usher to insulate with these substances on Friday, because he's going to take him out, and then he's going to return them to there, and they're going to add heat, and they're going to heat up the food again. Ukurabi Lazar ben Azariah, and according to Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, the Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah Amar, Kupa mata al tzida v'naitel. One tilts the entire box of insulation on its side, and he removes all the food that's in it. Ukrabana and the Tamam, and according to their reasoning, Dino and Amrin im haisa yaira mutter. That if they say that the insulated vessel was a cauldron, then it is mutter. So if you tilt all the food out of the pot and it's completely coming out of the insulation, so that's fine. Now you could use the food. You're not returning it back there to the pot or to the insulation. The Rabbanan say very similar. If it's a cauldron that is insulating, then it's permissible to use these material, because the cauldron is so hot anyway, these materials are not going to add any heat.